see where you're at and trust in Him and see where you're at in life. Now, I was thinking about this the other day, and y'all, it's not a trial for God by God. It's a trial for us, given to us from God. God knows where you're at. He knows where I'm at. God knows more about you than you know about yourself. God knows what I'm going to do tomorrow and next week. He knows what I'm going to respond to when He throws the next trial in my life. He knows how I'm going to react. God knows all that stuff. He is omniscient. He knows all. He is at the beginning, at the end. My Hebrew professor in college said one time, our lives are kind of like encyclopedias. And he said, if we're living one of our lives is from A and it ends at Z, he said, God, if you're living over here at about P right now, he said, God can go back to B and He can look at your past more clearly than you can, just like reading an encyclopedia, or He can go all the way up to X and pull out your future and look at it as clearly as your present. God knows what we're going to do. So the trial is not to prove to God how we're going to fare or how well we're going to do. The trials we go through are so God can show us how to trust Him better. It's to test us and kind of find the weaknesses in us. So when we figure out, oh man, God, here's where I need to trust You, here's where I'm weak, we'll turn to God in that area and say, oh, I didn't see it before, but with this trial, it's becoming very clear. My brother worked in a sheetrock factory that Danelle and I both worked in when we were right out of college. And he was one of the quality control guys. And part of his job is he would take little pieces of sheetrock, they would cut them up, take them in the lab, and they would apply pressure to them until they broke. And when they broke, they would measure how much it took to break that sheetrock. And if it didn't take enough pressure, they knew there was a flaw in the sheetrock, and they would start looking for what happened in the manufacturing process, what did it to make it break before it was supposed to break. You know, that's kind of what God's doing in trials in our life. He's putting that pressure on, and sometimes He crushes us, the Bible says. He breaks us so we can start looking at what's that flaw in my faith? What's that flaw in my trust level? Where's that area that I'm really not in tune with God? I'm really not trusting Him. And it's the trials that help us see that stuff. Usually it's not the good times. It's the testing times that we start to figure that stuff out. I'll tell y'all something, honest confession time tonight. Now that I don't confess that I'm going on the negative side of the gauge. Something God has been saying to me in the trials of my own life lately is an area that I struggle with that I never have recognized before is control. I like to have control of things. And as y'all know, I like things to be different and happening and changing all the time. But God has begun to show me that I like to be in control of my own destiny. I like to be the master of what's ahead for me. And God has started ripping that away from me and saying, you know what, Jim? I'm not going to let you control that anymore. And I'm just going to take it away from you. And I've kind of lost a lot of control. And for a while, it's been kind of like chaos. But all at once, I'm starting to wake up and say, oh, wait a minute, God. I think you're talking to me. I think you're putting the pressure on the sheetrock and you're saying, Jim, I don't want you controlling your life. I want to control your life. And I was telling a friend of mine today, or talking to Tim, one of our guys that does worship at church, and I said, man, I feel like I'm just going crazy lately in my mind and kind of losing it almost sometimes. And I said, I think God is kind of ripping control away from my life. And I said, I've been in this wrestling match with God, and I would like to say I've grown and I've gotten spiritual and I've gotten deep with God. And I'm at this place now that I just want to kind of let it all go, you know, and surrender to God spiritually. But I said, I'm more at a place where I'm just so tired of fighting. I'm like, okay, God, I give up. I can't fight anymore. You win. And I think sometimes that's what God's doing in our lives. He's taking us through those experiments, those trials, because He wants to grow us. He wants to make us better. So tough times come in our life. That's kind of the first thing of this, the big half of it, and then like a short half that we'll look at for the next few minutes is the results after we go through these things that are tough in our life. This is the good part, y'all. God wants to give us good results in our life, and that's why He allows the difficulty and the stuff and the things to come in. And He goes on to say in the end part of this verse that we come out with something that's got a greater worth than gold on the other side, because our lives get tried by fire, is what he puts it in the Bible. And he says what He gives us is literally more valuable, is the word he uses, than gold itself. And gold was like the most valuable substance you could lay your hands on in biblical times. I mean, you get gold, you've got it. I mean, it was the wealth of the world at the time. They didn't have a monetary system based on money that we don't really have. So it was really valuable stuff. And Peter, I keep calling him Paul, right? Peter said that trials will bring you something more valuable than what money can buy you, what the greatest riches can buy you. It'll bring you something that God is doing in your life that can't be burned away by anything that comes. When you get on the other side of your trial, God's going to have things for you, bigger purposes, bigger plans than you could have ever imagined were possible. This morning, in the middle of all my kind of ups and downs lately, I have a Bible app on my phone, and I've been reading a John Ortberg book lately, and that's kind of been my time with God stuff. Well, I didn't have time to read that this morning, so I just clicked on my Bible app on my phone, and I thought, I'm just going to see what the verse of the day is. You know, it pops a verse up every day. And today was, now to him who is able to do immeasurably more than all we ask or imagine, according to his power that is at work within us, to him be glory in the church of Jesus Christ throughout all generations, forever and ever. Amen. God said, I'm able to do more than you can think or you can even imagine in your life. He said, there are things that you can't even dream up that I can do to be at work in your life. Sometimes we just need God to remind us that in the middle of all the stuff that's going on, he's using those trials of fire to burn all the junk off and leave us with the thing that's more valuable than gold itself, and that's the absolute trust in him that he's able to do whatever he wants to do in our lives, any way he wants to do it. And that's kind of what Peter's getting at here. He's saying it's of greater worth than gold, and then he says, these have come so that these trials, so that the proven genuineness of your faith may result in praise, glory, and honor when Jesus Christ is revealed. There's a phrase he uses in there that one translation says that you might be found to the praise and glory of Jesus Christ when he's revealed. And it literally means, I'm trying to find the word for it so I'll tell you all right, to find by inquiry or scrutiny or observation, to find out by practice or experience. And what he's saying there is there's certain things that you can't learn any other way than by experience. Have you ever worked with somebody at your job that came in from college or technical school or training academy or whatever it was, and you've been on the job a long time, and some new snotty-nosed kid comes in, never done the job before and thinks he knows it all? Anybody ever worked with somebody like that? That's an annoying feeling. I've worked with pastors like that. They kind of come out of seminary, never been pastors, never done any of that, and churches hire them, give them a big salary, and they come in and you're like, what is this dude doing? You know, it's probably what y'all are thinking. What is this dude doing?
The bigger question might be, have we ever been that person?
That's exactly right. That's a good point, Chuck, because we've all been that person at some point. We have all been that person that comes in fresh and thinks we know it all, and starts a church and 3 years down the road says, crap, we don't know what we're doing. We have all been right there in that place in our life where we feel that. And in those times in our lives, what God is saying is there's certain things that you just got to live through and experience, or you can't know them. And that's why God lets the trials come, because they're experiments to get to know him better. And you won't know him by just reading the Bible. You won't know him by just praying. All those things are important. We talk about them a lot. You won't know him just by going to Journey Church, although if there's a way to get close to God, it's to come to Journey Church. No. You won't know him by any of those things, but you will know him as you walk with him and experience him every single day in your life. When I think of this passage, I always think of Rocky IV, I think it was, where Rocky fought Ivan Drago, however you say his name, the Russian. And Drago, there you go. And if you'll remember, Rocky goes to Russia to fight this Russian, and it was in the height of the Cold War. It's when Russia was like our mortal enemy, and all this stuff was going on. There's all this tension, and Rocky goes to fight this Russian. If you remember, the Russian's got all this equipment. He's in this nice gym, and it's all this electronics that he's punching these things, and it's registering the force of his punch, and he's doing all these things to work out. And then they show Rocky, and Rocky's out in the snow running in front of that Mercedes with Mick and his uncle behind him, you know, and he's running in the snow, and he's got that big ox cart, and he's lifting it, you know, and he's running through the mountains. He's doing his Rocky thing, doing pull-ups in a barn. He is just going through the difficulty of the stuff. And in the end of that movie, when it's all said and done, because Rocky took that hard way and he worked his body completely out, he beats that Russian down, this big giant Russian that's twice as tall as him. He tears him up because Rocky kind of worked through the experience of everything that had to happen to win that boxing match. Now, that's the way our lives is. There's certain things that you're not going to learn by just reading about it. You're not going to learn by having the latest gizmos and gadgets about it. You got to learn it by experience, by going through it. And God said that's why His trials come into our life. He ends up saying that what we end up with is something that results in the praise and the glory and the honor of Jesus. And it's like gold that's been refined by fire. All the stuff's been burned away. And we end up with something in our lives that actually pleases God. Paul, now I am talking about Paul, says later in his life, near the end, that for him to live is Christ, and he says to die is gain. And he realized something. He said he counts everything in his life that had built up. And Paul had a lot of credentials, y'all. He was a dude that if you had something to brag about religiously, he had it. He had all this stuff he'd grown up in religious schools, and he had done it all. He said, I count all that stuff as rubbish or as loss, and the translation is poop. He said, I count it all as dung. He said it's like manure patties out in a cow field. None of it compares to Christ and who He is in my life and what He's doing now. And y'all, what we start to find out is as we go through the trials, God burns all the cow pies off. He burns all the crap off. He burns all the stuff out of the way. And we end up with that stuff that really matters. And it's a trust and a relationship with Him where we do life with Him every single day. And He does it with us. And we know He's there. And what I want to encourage y'all about tonight is wherever you are on the gauge of your life, be encouraged tonight that it will change, that that gauge is going to move. For Clay, it's going to move backwards, and he won't be happy when it does. But Clay, once it does, it's going to move back up to happy again later on. For the rest of you guys, it's going to come down or it's going to go up. The gauges emotionally and kind of physically, they go up and down all the time. But if we learn that we don't have to live our life based on what we've been talking about on Sunday mornings, the weather in our life, we can't control that, but we set that thermostat of our mind, we start adjusting our thoughts towards God, we'll start figuring out that even in our toughest times, God is doing big stuff. He's at work. He's taking you through that for a purpose and for a plan. And if we'll let Him do it, if we'll say, God, show me what you want me to see here, we'll begin to grow in ways we've never grown before. If you want to get muscular, if you want to get fit, if you want to get ripped, you got to tear muscles down. It's the only way to do it. That's what you're doing when you work out. You're tearing down the fiber in your muscles, and then it grows and it rebuilds, and it gets stronger and stronger, and pretty soon you walk around like those guys that can't turn, That's what I'd like to be, is one of those dudes. But if you do it long enough, you'll get to where you look like Abe and Josh back there, and you're fit, and you're in shape. But it takes that working out, it takes that stretching it, and that's what God's doing in our life with trials. Stretching us to make us stronger, better, more trusting in Him. We become like the Bionic men and women of faith. He stretches us out to be great stuff. So anyway, this week, wherever you're at on your gauge, if it's bad, it's going to get better. If it's better, be trusting God for when it does get a little worse, because God's working even now in your life. All right.